Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity. This is going to be a very interesting discussion. I take the approach from a little bit of different angle, not from the drugs point of view or randomized clinical trials point of view, because we strongly believe at Sanofi, and we now built some experience that the randomized clinical trial, the traditional approach, will not necessarily get us close enough to the understanding of different disease patterns and the different solutions. And now, as suggested also by the ADA as the guideline, the individualization needs. So we have invested a lot actually recognizing the picture, the more holistic view on the determinants of health, that the drug itself or the medical care contributes only just by a fraction to outcomes. So there are multiple factors and contributors here, including social circumstances, behavioral factors, lifestyle, and we have all addressed this here in this conference, and that's why it's a great idea, I think, to take that holistic approach in such a meeting. But we face huge amount of challenges, and especially, in the big pharma, and it's not just related to the big data, it's also related to the a little bit the perception and the mentality that we still have in our R&D functions in big pharma. And the larger the pharma is, the more traditional views you might see on this, yeah. So I think you've seen this in an earlier session. And we do listen to the ADA and NIH approach in terms of the heterogeneity of type 2 diabetes. So this is the famous Lancet diabetes publication by Åquist. And we discussed it in the previous session. Dr. Cefalu led us through these clusters, the pros and cons and all this. And we do believe that something similar could be done by actually using big data. And I'm based in in Europe, in Paris, but I will show you actually mostly US data. Because it's something that exists today in the US to a large extent, to the large amount of data, but it's something that in the future will change in our hope, and then will take just as much Europe as well as the emerging markets. Now, the other problem is, and that's why I think the RCT is not going to be a solution of most of the issues, is that the vast majority of type 2 diabetes patients are excluded from randomized clinical trials. And you see this data, and you may recognize actually the landmark studies, and this research was done a few years ago. You see that only a subfraction of the patients are, the real-life patients are included. And it's not just the older studies, there's landmark studies, but even in the most recent insulin-related clinical studies had RCTs, they include only a very limited amount of patients who are, for instance, using basal insulin. And that's not, or that's actually limiting the representativeness of their results. So we developed a model, which we call, of course, it's like a known technology using artificial intelligence, predictive modeling, specific on hypoglycemia rates, and I bring up actually two examples today. One is on diabetes, on the stuff with established drugs, and the other would be more for future developments in the field of obesity. But this we call actually lightning, and all this has been published. You can see the reference at the bottom of the slide, using predictive modeling based on the Optum Humatica database that allows us to build prediction of hypoglycemia rates based on over 1 million patient data or patient treatments data, US based, and that is using electronic health records and claims. And I'm not going to get into the details of this. There's a methodology here that's published. Basically, and I'm not even a statistician to actually explain that. And that is actually one of the problems in real life, that an average physician would not necessarily understand all the details and the steps that are taken here in order to make the right interpretation. But this is the results that is actually, and this is basically representing how far you can go with this data, with large data representing patient groups that are usually excluded from randomized clinical trials or not well represented. Here in this model, in this hypoglycemia model, you see clearly the improvement, for instance, in this example, in hypoglycemia rates by using second generation baselines and analogs versus the first generation in subgroups that essentially at high risk for hypoglycemia, like those with renal impairment, those with increased hypo risk based on some variables that Novo is, for instance, using in the clinical studies, also the elderly patient groups. But that's, again, an example on established treatments and therapies. Now, how do we utilize these features for drug development in order to link, this exercise to individualization and more specific tailored therapy developments for a disease that is much more heterogeneous, even compared to type 2 diabetes. There's a broader group. So, and then we already done this based on comorbidity index scores. The clustering of obesity phenotypes, and on the right-hand side you can see the phenotypes, the 5 different phenotypes based on the Alquist publications experience, if you will, that is targeting more obesity, and these are the clinical phenotypes that we could come up with. Now, the next step, and this is a phase 2, of course, of the validation, is to follow these patients' individual development for complications, and then to predict the faster those patients who develop a complication the fastest. And then by doing so, we can tailor therapies, and we can guide our R&D colleagues to develop drugs accordingly. That's the beauty of it. And of course, I cannot see, as this is my last slide, the connectivity issue, because the big data always includes this issue of how much we enhance with our connectivity and being involved in connected ecosystems. And very recently, Sanofi has announced a collaboration with Abbott that will lead us to a better understanding of CGM data. We will connect with the insulin delivery systems with the cloud, and get access to, anonymously, of course, to large amount of continuous glucose monitoring data that will help us, again, to go beyond the traditional diabetes parameters and markers. So with that, I think I finish with the take-home message that metabesity and cardiometabolic diseases grow as a burden for societies globally. And I think it's extremely important to continue with all the collaborative efforts. It's not just from the pharma, it involves the academia, it involves patients, patient organizations, the large scientific associations, media, social media even. I'm just thinking about, how to capture hypoglycemia, for instance, with natural language processing, which is a new methodology. So everything changes in this field. Our understanding as physician, and I speak now as a clinician, is a little bit behind the speed of technology in that sense, and therefore we sometimes find it difficult to explain in larger forms to average clinicians what this means for them. Thank you very much.